Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let's see, I am seeing green, and I think I am, oh, good. And I think I am seeing sound. Come on, come on, come on. Come on. Alright, I am going to take it that I am live since it looks like it's trying to go. Thank you guys for showing up. I would like to go over the PMQ, Prime Minister questions. I follow UK politics. I love UK politics. I think it's fucking amazing. And there was an interesting exchange in PMQ between Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May. And it's something that they said in this exchange that makes the point, and it's something that takes place in the United States. And I would say that the UK should guard like nobody's business to prevent itself from sliding into what we've become in this country in this regard. So, Prime Minister questions. Get the volume up. The volume is still down. Or am I not close enough? Let's try it. Let's get closer. How does that finish? Any better? Any better? Alright, so I am going to take it as an act of faith that everything is going the way it's supposed to, and it sounds the way it's supposed to sound. Prime Minister questions, Jeremy Corbyn, Theresa May. This is the Prime Minister question that took place on Wednesday, so this is pretty recent. And let's have some fun. I love PMQ. PMQs are like one of my favorite things to watch, I swear to God. So, this great debate. Personally, I don't think Theresa May has a leg on this. Some of the stats. Look, I understand that the NHS is probably the best medical system in the world. Fair enough. She makes this point in this PMQ. Kind of besides the point. Whether you're the best in the world, it's like being the tallest midget. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, if you have the capacity to do better, you should do better. Especially when the reason you're not doing better has to do with choices that are being made. I often say that what takes place in regards to the United States is not an act of God. The policies that are being made that are allowing things to be a particular way. Well, same thing with the UK. And in this case, this comes up in the Prime Minister question. So, Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn, they're going to spar over the NHS. Let's go.
More children in good or outstanding schools today, and we're protecting our natural environment. We're building a Britain that can look to the future with optimism and hope.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could I wish you and all the House and all our staff a very happy New Year? Everybody's agreed? Yeah? Thank you. Just to, Mr. Speaker, I know it seems a long time ago, but just before Christmas, I asked the Prime Minister about the 12,000 people left waiting more than half an hour in the back of an ambulance at A&E departments. She told the House the NHS was better prepared for winter than ever before. So what words of comfort does the Prime Minister have to the 17,000 patients waiting in the back of ambulances in the last week of December? Is it that nothing is perfect by any chance?
That's damning, by the way. Like, regardless of your answer, that's problematic. One of the biggest arguments, and I hate to see this, like, as somebody who pushes for this thing of like universal healthcare and who looks at Britain's system as somewhat of a model in this case, it's problematic. The right wingers in this country often point to, well, those people are on waiting lists. I mean, you can get to a hospital anytime you want to in America. Those people are on waiting lists. Not realizing America's healthcare is like 30-something in the world. I mean, it's fucking horrible in comparison to everywhere else. Yes. If you have funds, it is the best place in the world to be. If you have funds. Well, the majority of the country is either on a poverty wage or in poverty. And going into $20, $30, $100,000 in debt just to pay a healthcare bill is insanity. That being said, Britain, 17,000. That's your answer. That's not good. The idea that you're waiting in the back of an ambulance when you're ill You're in an ambulance. You're trying to get to the hospital for a particular reason. The idea that you have to wait in an ambulance for care is problematic. Let's see what she said. Maybe she has a really good answer for why there's 17,000 people in this condition.
I fully accept that the NHS is under pressure over winter. It is regularly under pressure at winter times. I've been very clear. I apologise to those people who've had their operations delayed and to those people who have had their admissions to hospital delayed. But it is indeed the case that the NHS was better prepared this winter than ever before. And it might be helpful. Yes. It might be helpful if I let the House know some of the things that were done in order to ensure that preparedness. More people than ever before having flu vaccines, 2,700 more acute beds being made available since November. For the first time ever, we have seen urgent GP appointments available across the Christmas period across this country. More doctors specialising in treating the elderly in accident and emergency. But the right honourable gentleman mentions the last exchange that we had in this House. In our last exchange, he said mental health budgets have been cut. That is not right. Simon Stevens from the National Health Service has made clear that mental health spending has gone up both in real terms and as a proportion of the overall spending. So will he now apologise for what he previously said?
What? What? You have 17, you're government, you're Tories, you're the government. You're presiding over a government that has 17,000 people waiting in ambulances. And you're asking him to apologize for something that he said in the previous prime minister? Yeah. You need to get over yourself on that one. 17,000 people. Oh, that's shameful. I'm sorry, that's shameful. What are your priorities? What are your priorities? I mean, honestly, that's what this question really boils down to. What are your priorities? And is it part of your priority is to make sure that the people in Britain are able to get to the health care that they need? And if you have 17,000 people waiting in this condition, you're failing in those priorities. So let's keep going.
Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister knows full well that CAM's budgets have been raided and that many people that need help are not getting that help. And Mr. Speaker, we saw on ITV News the other night that nurses are spending their entire shift treating people in car parks because of backed-up ambulances. We know the Prime Minister recognises there's a crisis in our NHS because she wanted to sack the Health Secretary last week, but was too weak to do it. And if the NHS is so well-resourced and so
well prepared, why was a decision taken last week to cancel the operations of 55,000 patients during the month of January?
I say to the right honourable gentleman. Well, from the front bench, the Labour Party say apologise. Actually, if he had listened to the answer that I gave to his right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, I've made clear that I have already apologised to those whose operations have...
I'm going to replay that one. My thing was switch. Hold on.
We saw on ITV News the other night that nurses are spending their entire shift treating people in car parks because of backed-up ambulances. We know the Prime Minister recognises there's a crisis in our NHS because she wanted to sack the Health Secretary last week, but was too weak to do it. And if the NHS is so well-resourced and so well-prepared, why was a decision taken last week to cancel the operations of 55,000 patients during the month of January?
I say to the right honourable gentleman.
You know, when Obama passed the Affordable Care Act, or essentially signed it into law, he allowed Congress to write it. He took a plan that was essentially done by the Heritage Foundation, a right-wing, a right-wing think tank. Mitt Romney, another right-winger plutocrat, implemented that particular plan in Massachusetts. Why on earth would you go to a right-winger, an organization and a group that is dedicated to destroying healthcare in order to allow these people to take care of healthcare? Meaning you don't go to people who don't necessarily care about a particular thing and whose priority is not to make sure. The priority in this is to ensure that there's a market solution to the issue as opposed to making sure there's an actual solution to the issue. So it's like the point of healthcare should be healthcare. The point of healthcare should not be that somebody makes a buck out of healthcare. And in our particular case, you have the Affordable Care Act where they kept these leeches of insurance companies profiting off the misery and the illnesses of the people in this country. That's a fucking amazing thing that would be allowed. Allow these guys to make massive amounts of profit. You have Medicare that would handle all the capabilities of all of these companies. These companies are completely unnecessary. And yet, a market-driven solution to healthcare. Obama wanted to keep these leeches in the system because his intention on this is, I want to keep profit in this industry. As if you can have this utopian fantasy of having it both ways. If your point, and this is what I'm getting at, if the point of your NHS is healthcare, if the point of healthcare is healthcare, then you fund it to the degree that it needs to be funded. Theresa May makes this habit of saying, well, we gave this much money to this. Who says that the amount that you're given is adequate to make sure it can do what you need it to do? So, 55,000 people were canceled. And the argument, whatever argument, anything that's going to come out your mouth at that point is going to have to explain why you were able to cancel 55,000 people's procedures. And why your system, the system that you said was well prepared and adequate, wasn't able to accommodate all of these people who are stuck in these ambulances and all of these people who you had to essentially cancel their service. You don't go to people who don't care about healthcare to get information on how to do healthcare. The Tories, that's not their priority. That's my point. In the same way that right-wingers is not their priority. For healthcare, their point is profit. How do we maximize profit? How do we make this stuff? In their case, they look at this. How do we cut costs? How do we add a little bit, but we have other priorities, so we don't necessarily want to fund it in the way that it needs to be funded? That's not their priority. So yeah, you're going to have situations where there are 55,000 people because they're cutting edges, or they're funding it in a way that is not adequate, meaning they're trying to keep profit in the process as opposed to just making sure the process works the way it's supposed to work. Let's keep going. I look at part of the reason I like British politics is because I can see the similarities within the United States. Meaning I can see it's almost like one is a shadow of the other in this case. You guys have this kind of brand of a system or brand of a government that has a certain, I guess, perspective on capitalism and this kind of social democracy of sorts. But we're, how can I say this? We're like your darker brother, if that makes sense. It's what takes place here is far more rapacious than what takes place in the UK. But you can see the seeds of what's taking place in the UK looking kind of like here. So I guess that's what it means. I can see where, I guess I'm seeing how bad we are. I can see some of the missteps that you guys are taking, landing you into this particular place. Your Tories are slowly edging you further to the right, which is their point. Corbin is acting as this kind of bulwark, this force is trying to pull back in the other way, this countervailing force. But ultimately, left to their own devices, the Tories will take you further and further to the right. The NHS is one of those battlegrounds. And the NHS, yes, they will undermine the NHS. I would argue that they are undermining the NHS. If you have 55,000 procedures that need to be canceled, they are undermining the NHS.
Well, from the front bench, the Labour Party say apologise. Actually, if he had listened to the answer that I gave to his right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, I've made clear that I have already apologised to those whose operations have been delayed, and we will make sure that those operations are reinstated as soon as possible. We are putting record funding into the NHS and record funding into mental health. But
that doesn't matter. I'm sorry, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. You're apologizing because people didn't get their operations. You've canceled operations. If you're going to say that, turning behind and saying, look, we've put a huge amount of funding into it, it's clearly not enough. It's clearly not enough. This Tory argument that, well, I mean, we have to ration this. Like, we can only put so much, and we've put this much in, and this is the best that we can do. This is the argument of Democrats. I've often said Democratic Party is essentially the Tory Party in the UK. This is the best that we can do. This is the best that we can do. You're clearly not doing enough. That's Jeremy Corbyn's point. The point of healthcare is healthcare. You need to fund the NHS to the degree that the NHS needs to operate. If you have 55,000 people that you have had to cancel their operations, if you have nurses in parking lots giving medical care because your hospital is so backed up and ill-equipped to deal with those issues, then you're failing. You're failing at your task. And it's fucking amazing. This is mind-blowing to me. You would never hear about this in America. This is kind of my point. This is fucking mind-blowing. And it's not because America has a better healthcare system. It's just, it's funded in a different way. But in your case, the point is funding your healthcare system to a way that's adequate will take care of this issue. And it's not this kind of magical door or anything else. There's no magic in this. You need X amount in order to do X amount. If you have a demand, or if you have a requirement that says we need to be able to take care of this many people, then you fund it to the degree where you need to take care of that many people. This is not fucking science. I mean, shit, man. They make choices. It's just so happened the choices that they're making are shafting you. Shafting your NHS.
He keeps on about the preparations for the National Health Service. I was very pleased last week to be able to go and say in person a thank you to staff at Frimley Health Trust from both Frimley Park and Wexham Park hospitals for the work that they have been doing to deliver for patients across this period of particular pressure across the winter. Our NHS staff, and that's not just doctors and nurses, it's support staff like radiographers, it's administrative staff, it's porters, it's everybody working in our National Health Service, do a fantastic job day in and day out, and they particularly do that when we see these winter pressures. But in terms of being prepared, this is what NHS providers said only last week. Preparations for winter in the NHS have been more extensive and meticulous than ever before.
Jeremy Corbin!
Mr. Speaker, we all...
What does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Like, you telling me that these are great people? Yes, I accept they're great people. What does that have to do with the price of tea in China? You've just said that you've had to apologize because you shamefully had to cancel 55,000 operations because you were ill-prepared to deal with those particular procedures. You have nurses assisting people in parking lots because you've, again, not given them the equipment or the supply or the resources they needed to be able to accommodate those people who are needed to be seen. And turning around and saying, well, look, our people do a good job. Yes, your people don't have a choice but to do a good job under horrible conditions because you haven't given them the resources that they needed. Like, shit, man. It's like, they're great people. Part of her reason for saying that is trying to soften the blow of the negative and horrible stuff that just came out. 55,000 operations, people being seen in ambulances or being seen outside. And so, yeah, you would hope that she would say, hey, our nurses, doctors, and staff are really great people. They do a really good job. Because we haven't been giving them the resources that they needed to do their job in an easier way. Amazing.
Thank all NHS staff for what they do. But the reality is that the 55,000 operations cancelled means that those 55,000 people join the already 4 million waiting for operations within the NHS. Perhaps the Prime Minister could listen to...
Wait a minute. You guys have 4 million people waiting for operations. Holy fucking hell. That number is mind-blowing. I know there's a... Look, and one of the arguments right-wingers always make, and it's a bullshit argument, where they would say something to the effect of, well, I mean, people would have to get waiting lists if you had a medical care. America coming up with a system of some kind of national healthcare system doesn't have to be exactly like any other particular nation. It just has to make sure that everybody is covered from the time that person is born to the time that person dies. It doesn't have to be the exact specific way of any other particular system. That's the first point. The second point is they tend to give a bullshit argument of, well, I mean, they're going to have waiting lists. I mean, you're not going to be able to get your spleen surgery if you have to go in an emergency. And again, that, of course, is also BS. If somebody goes to the NHS and there's some kind of emergency, from what I understand, they're taken care of. The fact is, nobody in America gets a surgery overnight unless it's an emergency. But again, anywhere else in the world, you would get that surgery. I guess what I'm saying is, yes, there's always a waiting list. Even in America, to some degree, there's a waiting list. I go in and they find some issue. They said, look, we're going to do your knee replacement in 3 weeks. That's a fucking waiting list. So to some degree, yes, there's always going to be waiting lists. Even in America, there's waiting lists. Those things... I'm just making the point that in America, they make this bullshit argument of, hey, you're going to have to wait for your procedures and wait for your surgeries. You have to wait for your procedures and surgeries anyway. Fact is, in this country, you get massive amounts of debt just because you want to go to a doctor or want to be seen. In Britain, not so much. There's always trade-offs. So fair enough. But come on. Canceling surgeries? That's... You don't go to right-wingers to manage your healthcare system. It's not their priority. That's my point. That's my point. And whether that's in the United States, whether that's in the UK, and I understand that other countries can be somewhat softer and more liberal, so they have more liberal right-wingers. And yes, by Tories measure, Tories for the most part, again, act like Democrats in the United States. So to some degree, I have a general understanding of Tories in this way. You don't go to the right wing for something that they don't particularly care about. If you give me 10 things that I need to do, how am I going to prioritize those things? What am I going to deem to be the most important? What are the things I'm going to give less resources to because I don't care about those things as much? Theresa's main argument in all of this, and I've watched several of these debates where they've brought up the NHS or some other service in Britain. We've given X amount to this particular thing. We've funded this thing more than at any time before. We've done this and we've done that. And the secondary question becomes, yes, I understand you gave X amount, but how much was it that was going to be necessary for it to do what it needed to do? Meaning, in order to get the basic most efficient level of functioning. So let's say if that thing needed a 10 in order to function. If you're giving it enough so it's a 5, then it's not going to be a 10. So for you to say, I gave X amount of money to this particular thing, maybe it needed twice as much as you gave it in order for it to be what it was supposed to be. You're shortchanging it. Making the argument of how much you gave as if the amount you gave is somehow indicative of, we've given it what it needed to function. Well, no. You gave it what you wanted to give it. You didn't necessarily give it what it needed. And this is the point that Jeremy Corbin is making continuously over and over and over again. You're not funding the NHS to the way that the NHS needs to fund in order to get its best possible functionality. And because of that, you have people, longer waiting lines. You have people being serviced outside by nurses. And you're canceling surgeries. 55,000. Let's keep going.
The experience of Vicky. Her 82-year-old mother spent 13 hours on a trolley in a corridor. That was on top of the 3 hours between her first calling 999 and arriving at hospital. Vicky says, and I quote, "A volunteer first responder from Warwickshire Heart Service, whose day job is in the army, kept Mum safe until paramedics arrived." Her mother then suffered a heart attack just a week before. This is not an isolated case. Does the Prime Minister really believe the NHS is better prepared than ever for the crisis it's now going through?
I'm going to let Theresa May answer that, and I'm not going to interject along with this. There's something that Jeremy Corbyn does that I absolutely and fundamentally love. And I've had other people say something to me like, it's like, this guy sounds like a fanboy. Why is he so excited about this? You don't understand how uncharacteristic it is for the Prime Minister, or even for the major Labour Party, or in this country, let's say major politicians, to talk about individual experiences of the people in the country. Meaning, I know of no scenario, at least not major scenario, where periodically and consistently, the person who's the lead of the other opposition party gets up and says, somebody sent me a letter that said this. This is a problem that this particular person is experiencing in our society. It gets back to the heart of what politics is actually supposed to be. Those people aren't there purely for the sake of politics. They're there because they want to get things accomplished. What they're supposed to be getting accomplished is to be the will of the public itself, meaning they're there purely as an avatar of the public that they're supposed to be representing. Him bringing up the letter drills at home. It drills it home. Oftentimes, the stuff that these guys are talking about are so like in the ether. It doesn't necessarily, it touches people, but it doesn't touch them in a direct way where those people full well understand and it can grasp. Most people are just in their lives and not paying attention to this stuff. Bringing it up to the direct experiences of the people in the society itself and presenting a Prime Minister with, you've been leading this country. And in leading this country, and I understand Cameron was there before you, but Cameron was the same way, same ilk. You're not necessarily voting for the individual, you're voting for the party. If this is the problem that this person has in this particular society, and part of the reason this person has this problem is because of your leadership. Answer this person. Answer this civilian. Answer this person who's in this country, who's under your leadership, who's run into this particular issue because of your failures. I love it. Fucking love it. Let's keep going.
First of all, can I say to the right honourable gentleman that nobody wants to hear people having to experience what Vicky and her mother had experienced. And of course, we need to ensure that we learn from these incidents, and that's exactly what we do in the National Health Service. And I'm very happy to ensure that that particular case is looked at, if he would like to provide me with the details of that particular case. But week in and week out in the run-up to Christmas, and now today, what the right honourable gentleman is doing is giving an impression of a National Health Service that is failing everybody that goes to use the NHS. The reality in our NHS...
No, he's not. No, he's not. He's giving you instances and problems that are associated with your particular thing. Look, let's be honest. And I give Theresa May the benefit of the doubt on this one. Any opposition party, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where. At least around the world, in the systems that I know of, are competitive. It's not a cooperative model. Meaning, we're in politics. And yes, we're in the same country. And yes, we're supposed to, technically, put this idea of the country ahead of everything else. Bullshit. Bullshit. We're in parties, we're in oppositions, and our goal is to win. And our goal is to take power. And we do that any way that we need to and take power. And maybe it's more cutthroat in the United States, and maybe I'm more cynical about this process because I live in this country. But as far as I know, that's politics. When Richard Nixon is going behind the back of the President of the United States and working with the Vietnamese in order to keep the Vietnam War going longer, do you think he was putting country ahead of his political goals in that sense? No. LBJ said it was treasonous. LBJ is on tape saying what Richard Nixon did was committed treason. Literally, keeping a war going that's murdering thousands. To end up with pretty much the exact same deal that LBJ wanted to do. X number of years later, I think it was like 6 or 7 years later, before he fell in disgrace, fucking impeached. No, same thing with Reagan. I mean, this idea of keeping those hostages in because Reagan understood that those hostages being in was going to give him a better chance. beating Carter because it made Carter look like an asshole that those hostages were being taken. Yes, presidents in this country do go behind, or parties work against the country itself. Yes, they would stab Lady Liberty in the side if they thought it would get them in power. And so, yeah, when Republicans are doing the debt ceiling thing, where they're willing to crash the financial economy of the entire planet in order to take power, or to hurt the president of the United States, yes, that's politics. This is a competitive model. Opposition parties, in trying to make their case, create somewhat of a scorched earth picture of the things that are taking place. It's hell and brimstone. You know, the sky is falling. God damn it, they're asteroids that are hitting the planet. The world is falling apart. Now, to some degree, all of them do it. It depends on how scorched earth the person gets. If it gets cartoonish and ridiculous, then at that point it doesn't necessarily work. When they were giving the rebuttal to the State of the Union address, I think it was during Obama's term, and I can't think of the guy who gave it, but he gave a hellscape. It was like, are you talking about the United States or a hell versions of hell? It was like, what the fuck are you talking about? So, fair enough. It has to be tempered with a certain amount of reality. What he's saying, however, it's not wrong. Like, you might take this issue that he's creating this horrible version of the NHS. True or false? Were there 17,000 people waiting in ambulances in order to get into the hospitals? Were there nurses outside helping those people, or helping those people because they couldn't get into the hospitals itself? Were those hospitals and your NHS so ill-equipped in regards to the resources that you was given to that particular NHS that they weren't able to take care of the people that they were supposed to take care of? Did you cancel 55,000 surgeries? Do you have 4 million surgeries? These things are flat facts. If these things are flat facts, then yes, this is a picture that's taking place, meaning these are people who are adversely affected by the choices and the decisions that you and your government made. It is not an act of God. You made a choice on what you wanted to fund or what you didn't want to fund, and the resources you wanted to give and how you wanted to allocate those resources. This was you. This was you. I understand that the NHS is one of the best systems in the world. God bless. God bless. By the same token, you as a Tory party have failed the NHS. This is the argument. This is the indictment that Jeremy Corbyn is making. And for you to have to come out and apologize as the Prime Minister, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we failed you and had to cancel your surgeries. I apologize. I'm Theresa May. I apologize. I apologize. They don't want your apologies. They don't want your accolades. They don't want your patriotism. They want you to fund them with the resources that they require to reach and assist the people of the UK in the way that they needed to be assisted. That's all they want from you. Do your job. That's what they want. Come on.
Is that we are seeing 2.9 million more people now going to accident and emergency. We're seeing over 2 million more operations taking place each year. Our National Health Service is something that we should be proud of. And that's why it's a first-class National Health Service, a first-class National Health Service that has been identified as the #1 health system in the world. That means it's a better health system than Australia, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Canada, Switzerland, Sweden, France, Germany, and the United States of America.
That's not the point. I'm sorry, that's not the point. This conservative argument, I used to get annoyed when Cameron used to make these type of arguments. If, say you had a household, and say your rent was $2,000 a month. You're living in a nice place. Say your electric bill was $100 a month. Say all of your expenses combined ended up being $4,000 a month. If you and your wife was making a job that was bringing in $3,000 a month, you would say, Theresa May would say, well, look, we've dedicated $3,000 to this particular endeavor. That's great. Your rent is $4,000 or your expenses are $4,000. I understand that you're putting a decent amount towards that particular thing or those particular items, congratulations, I understand. But what it needs to run is more than what you're giving it. What it needs to run is clearly more than what you're giving it. Continuously telling us we're giving it this much is not the argument. I'm sorry, that is not a decent argument. Telling us that we're number one in the world is not a decent argument. The point in this is not to be number one or anything else in the world. The point is to provide healthcare. The point of healthcare is healthcare. So, what is the number? How do you need to fund it? How do you need to reorganize it? What do you need to do to make sure that the people who are going to the healthcare system in Britain are taken care of? That's your only question. And if you're not hitting your marks, if whatever you're giving it is not supplying the needs of those people, then you're not doing enough. That's his only point. That's his only indictment. That, for the most part, is my indictment. I don't even live in fucking Britain. It's just not a good argument to say that, well, we're giving it this much. The point is, what you're giving is not enough. That's the point. It's like this democratic Tory argument, this persistent, well, I mean, we need to cater to the capitalists, and we need to keep this market-driven solution to stuff. And in order to keep markets into this process, I mean, this is the best we can do under this model. Maybe you need a different model. If the model that you have is not meeting the needs of the people that you have, then maybe you need a different model. Let's keep going. There's going to be something that I don't remember which one says. Maybe Jeremy Corbin who says it, that hits it on the head. And I think this is it. I think this is the exchange.
Mr. Speaker, we're all on this side of the House very proud of the principle of the National Health Service, healthcare as a human right. But the reality is that in the past year, 565,000 people have spent time on trolleys when they should be treated. Absolutely. The number of elderly people being rushed into A&E from care homes has risen by 62% since the Tories took power. Care Quality Commission figures suggest that nearly a quarter of homes need improvement. Not only is this robbing older people of their dignity, but it's putting pressure on A&Es and on ambulance services. So why, instead of dealing with the social care crisis, has the Prime Minister rewarded the Health Secretary with a promotion and a new job title?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that I think there are many voices across this House, including those from his own party, who have been encouraging me to ensure that we see better integration between health and social care. I'm pleased that we have recognised this by making the Department of Health the Department for Health and Social Care, and that has been recognised by Age UK, who have said that this is a welcome and long overdue recognition of the interdependence of health and social care. I saw for myself last week at Frimley Park the good work that is being done by some hospitals up and down the country, working with GPs, working with care homes, working with the voluntary sector to ensure that elderly people can stay at home safely and do not need to come into hospital with all the consequences of them coming into hospital beds. That's the way forward. That's what we want to do, ensuring that we're seeing that integration of health and social care at the grassroots level. But the way the right honourable gentleman talks, you would think that the Labour Party had all the solutions for the National Health Service. If the Labour Party have got all the answers, why is it that we see funding being cut, targets not being met in Wales, where the Labour Party is responsible?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister leads a government that's responsible for the funding of national governments such as in Wales. She knows full well what's been cut from Wales. But she is, Mr. Speaker, directly responsible. She is, Mr. Speaker, directly responsible for the NHS in England. And giving the Health Secretary a new job title won't hide the fact that £6 billion has been cut from social care under the Tories. Mr. Speaker, part of the problem with our NHS is that its funds are being increasingly siphoned off into private companies, including in the Health Secretary's area of Surrey.
Order, Mr. Shelbrooke, calm yourself, man. You're supposed to be auditioning to become an elder statesman. But there are many more auditions to come on President Evidence. Calm yourself, it'll be good for your health. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, even more money is being siphoned out of our NHS budgets into private health companies. Even in the Health Secretary's area of Surrey, a clinical commissioning group was forced to pay money to Virgin Care because it did not win a contract. Will the Prime Minister assure patients that in 2018 less NHS money intended for patient care will be feathering the nests of shareholders in private health companies?
Right there. That's the problem. Right there. That's it. And this takes place in the United States, which is why I'm putting a pin in this particular one. If you remember, I don't know how many people follow, well, it's my audience, so I'm pretty sure my audience follows the Democratic thing. One of the things that Nomiki Hans, I gave her credit for it, where she lost her shit in that meeting about the people who were being paid off. Like, so you would have these private corporations who are working with the DNC, and the DNC is paying these guys, and these guys are like these private contractors, and they're taking money for this stuff. Corporations are profit-seeking entities, meaning they're profit-seeking machines. Their goal is to maximize their profit. If you're running the NHS, and you're adding in a profit-making enterprise into the NHS, you're effectively, essentially giving a large share of state money into private enterprise. Like, so you're think of it from the standpoint of Medicare versus other insurance companies. Medicare, I think at the time, it used to have like a 2% overhead. So that's 2% of what goes into Medicare goes into things other than supplying healthcare. A regular insurance company, at least under Obamacare, was supposed to be kept at 30%. Meaning 30% of that is essentially paying staff and everything else, but it's also paying somebody at the top millions of dollars in profits. Supplying millions of dollars in profits. The other 70% is supposed to go towards care, but you're still talking about 30% that's not going for the things that it's actually supposed to go for, meaning medical care. In Europe or in London, how much of the money that's being given is being given to people's pockets? Meaning, if you have a corporate interest or private enterprise that's in that particular thing, how much of that money is going into things other than supplying healthcare? Meaning, if you guys were supplying that yourselves, meaning if the government was supplying that particular service, I would wager that the overhead of that particular service would be much less. And that overhead being much less, much of the money that Theresa May is bragging about putting into it would probably go better or more so into the healthcare itself. Adding private entities is more expensive. Not just more expensive, I would imagine that in order for them to try to square the circle of saying, okay, we can't pay you as much, and because some of that money is going into pockets of the people who are in that enterprise, they're probably paying their staff less in order to compensate. At the end of the day, though, you're talking about adding private interests into something where private interest is unnecessary. She's a Tory. I consider her a Democrat if she was in the United States. And ultimately, what she's talking about is putting in things that try to maximize their profit at the expense of the UK citizens. They're going to take your state money. They're going to take that money and they're going to say, thank you for the money that would have typically went into actual issues of healthcare. And yes, we're going to supply some service. There's going to be something that we supply. But it's going to be something that you probably could have supplied for yourself. Yeah, man. All I'm saying is, if Theresa May is saying she's putting a bunch of money into the NHS, and a lot of that money is going into entities that are just maximizing their profit at the expense of the UK, it's somewhat problematic. And it gives somewhat of an explanation of why there are budget shortages in the way that there are budget shortages. If I'm not mistaken, they started privatizing aspects of the NHS when the Conservatives got in government. Again, they're like Democrats, a market-driven solution to healthcare. This utopian idea that you can have markets and healthcare, and you can find some happy medium where corporate interests can make a huge amount of cash and people will get their healthcare needs met. There is no such thing as utopia. There is no such thing as utopia. And ultimately what it means is Tories are giving your money away, your hard-earned taxes, the money of the UK government away to private corporations while getting less health care for that exchange. It's fucking amazing.
Right, honourable gentlemen, first of all on Wales, this government has given more money to the Welsh government. It is a decision of Labour in Wales to deprioritise funding for the National Health Service in Wales. And on the issue of the private sector and its role.
Just a side note, I'm going to be a complete guy in this moment. I love it when she points. So, again, this is one of those things you don't see in American politics. You don't have people in American politics point. It's seen as impolite. I remember when Bill Clinton, I think it was Bill Clinton, when he was running, or Al Gore, one of them, and Bill Clinton was either pointing or something, and the press was like, this guy's pointing. Look at what this guy's doing. And then politicians started doing this weird thing with their hands, so it made it look like they're pointing. It's so fucking bizarre. So I love this idea that she's leaning on the dispatch box, just, this is not the reason that you're saying it is. I love it. I love it. Just going in
role in the health service. Under which government was it that private access and private use of private sector in the health service increased? No, it wasn't. No, I tell...
Order. Let me order. I say to the Shadow Secretary of State for Health, he too is supposed to be auditioning for something. He's normally a very amiable fellow, but he's gesticulating in a very eccentric fashion. He must calm himself. It's not necessary. It's not good for his image. Prime Minister.
I say to the right honourable gentleman, first of all, we've put more money into Wales, but the Labour government in Wales has decided to deprioritise funding for the National Health Service. And the increase that was seen in private sector companies working in the health service wasn't under the Conservative government, it was under a Labour government of which the right honourable gentleman was a member.
Jeremy Corbyn!
My honourable friend, the Shadow Health Secretary, is auditioning to be Health Secretary, and he shows real passion for our NHS. Mr. Speaker, under this government...
I want to mention one thing. There's an odd dynamic that you can... I see more so in Britain, less so in the United States. Well, sometimes in the United States. No, you say it in the US. It's expressed differently. Hypocrisy. Oh, hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is a beautiful thing in politics. And it's something that seems to be somewhat ubiquitous. So the Blairites had moved so far to the right that she can make this argument of, whoa, you guys are claiming something for us, but you guys did the exact same thing. And you would see this happen a lot between Miliband and Cameron, where it was like, well, you guys did this. Well, you guys did this too. It's like, so yeah, both were corrupt. That's great. I don't think, though, that anybody will believe that this applies to Corbin. Meaning, how can I say this? One of the things that Sanders had to his advantage was you couldn't tar him with some of the stuff that you could tar Democrats with. Ultimately, he seemed somewhat fundamentally different. He was an outsider in this case. The guy calls himself a socialist. He was running as an independent. Corbin is similar to this. Meaning the forces in the United States that were pulling to the sides, meaning looking for something else. This idea of trying to destroy the center that was being held in the country, in all of these countries. It were going to both wings. The failure of the left went the rise of the right, at least in the sense of the United States, meaning the thing that ended up winning, in this case, was Trump. In the UK, you guys you had that election. Labour didn't necessarily have the strength in order to win that election. If you had an election today, Corbyn would most likely win. So, yeah, same thing in the UK. That doesn't apply to Corbyn. Meaning the stuff that she's throwing at him certainly doesn't apply to Corbyn. I think Theresa May fully understands, and I think a lot of people in the UK understands, particularly in regards to banking and those type of things. I think they understand that Corbyn is fundamentally different in what Corbyn wants to, the way he wants to reconstruct the British society. there is no doubt that Corbyn looks at funding the NHS from the standpoint of the point of healthcare is healthcare. I'm going to fund the NHS to the degree that the NHS needs to be funded. It's not that Labour has this kind of magical solution in order to, fix or repair or to maintain the NHS. There's no magic. It's called funding. Give it the goddamn resources that it needs, and you create the incentive structure that allows people to flow into the NHS for those particular jobs and those particular services. Yeah, it's called funding. It's no fucking magic. And yeah, that attack doesn't necessarily land on Corbyn. Corbyn is fundamentally different in this. And I think she understands that. But by the same token, again, you don't necessarily vote for a person, you vote for their party. He's changing the party, though. He's changing the party. He's not a Blairite. So.
Virgin Care got £200 million worth of contracts in the last year alone, 50% up on the year before. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to understand that it's her policies that are pushing our NHS into crisis. Tax cuts for the super rich and big business are paid for, yes, Mr. Speaker, they're paid for by longer waiting lists, ambulance delays, staff shortages and cuts to social care. Creeping privatisation is dragging our NHS down. The Health Secretary, during his occupation of her office to keep his job, said he won't abandon the ship. Isn't that an admission that under his captaincy, the ship is indeed sinking?
Creeping privatization. Creeping privatization, meaning they're cutting off bits and pieces of the NHS and selling it to private interests and private corporations. And yes, it's more expensive. I don't understand these people making this argument that this is somehow better. The government is more efficient in this. It's more efficient in this. You're trying to allow people to maximize their profit at the expense of people's illnesses and foibles and pains and sorrows. And essentially breaking and cutting the NHS and handing it off to people to make massive amounts of profit at the expense of the NHS. Instead of paying that guy how many of millions of dollars, that CEO and all of that staff and everything else, all of those bonuses, whatever else those people are getting. You know what you can do with that money? Actually invest it back into the NHS for actual care. Let's keep going. Jeremy Corbyn is perfectly right on this.
This government is putting more money into the National Health Service. We see more doctors in our NHS, more nurses in our NHS, more operations taking place in our NHS, more people being treated in accident and emergency in our NHS. But we can only do that. We can only do that if we have a strong economy.
Here we go. Here we go. She does this. Oh, she always does this at the end. She's like, well, look, the first part, we have more operations taking place in the NHS. Well, you canceled 55,000 operations, so let's take that one off that list. That's the first part. And again, it's not enough. It's not enough. Like, at which point do you realize that this argument, and in no way challenging what he's saying, you're giving all of these tax cuts to the super rich and big businesses, while at the same token, not supplying the NHS with the services it needs and the resources that it needs to do its job, not to mention allowing corporate interests to essentially make money off the backs of the UK citizens. I honestly hope that the people in the UK, in Britain, understands, or even pays attention. I don't know how many people watch the Prime Minister questions in the UK, but at the very least, I would hope when they see something like this, they would understand that this idea of, well, we're funding the NHS to this, is different than we're giving the NHS what the NHS needs to do its job. Those are different things. What she's saying is not a defense. It's our excuse for failure. That's essentially what she's saying. This is why we're failing at this. This is my excuse for failure. Keep giving this excuse. She's about to rev up and say that what Jeremy Corbyn wants is to tank the economy, which is her way of giving her own hellscape. Jeremy Corbyn gives his hellscape in regards to the NHS. Her hellscape is, this guy's going to tank the economy. He's going to destroy the world. There's going to be hell and fish walking the earth. Let's take a look. Do her thing.
And what would we see from the Labour Party? We've turned the economy round from the recession that the Labour Party left us with. What do we know? What do we know about the Labour Party's economic policies? Well, we were told all about them from the description from the Shadow Education Secretary, who I see is not in her place on the front bench today. I do apologise. I didn't realise, Mr. Speaker, I did not realise the Shadow Education Secretary was herself undergoing medical treatment. I apologise unreservedly for that comment. But I do have to say that she did describe the economic policies of the Labour Party in unparliamentary terms. It did include the word bust, but she did say that the Labour Party's economic policy was high risk. Now, that means high risk for taxpayers, high risk for jobs, and high risk for our NHS. And that's a risk we will never let them take.
Yeah, that's their wind-up. David Cameron used to do the same thing. Now, mind you, her argument and the stuff that she wants to do is give tax cuts to the rich and all this other stuff, and at the same token, having people waiting outside for hospital beds. Think about that. You're ill, you're sick, something takes place, there's some emergency in your life, whatever that emergency is. You might have a heart attack, maybe your mom's having a heart attack, whatever's taking place. You call for an ambulance, and because the hospitals are so backed up, because the Tory government hasn't funded it to the degree that it needed to fund it for it to work in an optimal way, she's stuck in an ambulance outside of some kind of hospital or something like that, with the nurse coming down to try to treat your mom, your aunt, your dad outside in the parking lot. But to Theresa May's credit, they were able to give tax cuts to big business and corporations. That's great. That's great. This is the Democratic argument. When Democrats would get in office, they were going to also give a tax cut. It might not have been as gross as Republicans, but again, they're least worse. So the tax cut was going to be least worse. By the same token, they were perfectly willing to put through Obamacare that left 20 or 30 million people off the healthcare rolls without health insurance. And even with health insurance, mind you, you still have people who are getting bills and who are getting billed to death. Health insurance is not a protection mechanism in this case. You're still getting bills. You still end up in massive amounts of debt. If you have a kid that's ill or a kid that's sick, and that kid is continues to go to the hospital and continues to get surgeries, even if you have Medicare for all, Medicare pays 80% of your bill. What if you had a kidney transplant? Not just a kidney transplant. Let's say they had to take your kidney out. Let's say they had to take your appendix out, and you had a bill for $100,000. Are you able to pay $20,000 bill, hospital bill? What if you have a kid that's sick and you have to go continuously to the hospital over and over and over again? You have a copay of $20 for each time that you have to go. I'm making this point that the Obamacare thing, yes, it's better than nothing, but it's still fucked up and flawed. And the UK needs to protect what they're doing. Like I said, the Tories in the UK are like the Democrats in the United States. The Democrats in the United States is perfectly willing to put through a market-based solution to healthcare, a utopian vision of healthcare, which is not utopian at all. It's still putting people in bankruptcy and everything else. The Tories will do the same thing to the NHS. They will privatize, and they will try to claw back each and all the gains that you were able to get from the lefties in your country. They will cut it up piece by piece by piece, like some torture. Like some person who's torturing somebody, cutting off toes and cutting off fingers. So, protect your NHS. That's all I would say. That is my advice from your darker brother across the pond. Protect your NHS. The Tories will rip it to shreds. So, let's see. We have people here. I wasn't sure if anybody would be interested in PMQ. I love PMQ. May went to Oxford. They teach them the point when debating, unlike Cambridge, who teaches to wave the finger around when pointing. I love the pointing. I love it. I love it. Blah, blah. It's also about lean forward when you are about to stick something to your opponent thing. I love that too. Yeah, I've noticed that. It's manly. if that makes sense. Like it's this a certain bravado associated with where you're leaning in. It's this heroic thing of I am about to say some massive shit to you. I love it. Absolutely love it. I don't like this polished thing that takes place in the United States debating where you're not allowed to be a little bit rough. The roughest that I think I've seen in debating in the United States when Obama was having a conversation with Romney, and they were debating foreign policy. Obama is weak in many other debates. Like, don't get me wrong, he's good at debating when he's having those debates. But he's only good at those debates because the person he's debating is so far off the fucking political spectrum that it's like, you know, debating a ham sandwich. What he's saying. Look, Republicans in this country are so batshit crazy that if they're having a conversation with you, they don't have a choice but to lie. They're either going to try to obfuscate what they're saying in a way that's just so Orwellian that it, you know, the definition just defies, you know, don't even know what the fuck they said. If they tell the truth, they're going to lose. Most of the American public is repulsed by the things Republicans say because Republicans are really only out for the top 1%. So it's not the hardest thing in the world to debate somebody like that. If you're debating a plutocrat, well, that's not the hardest thing in the world. You are technically least worse if you're doing as functioning as a Democrat. At least worse from the standpoint of policy. I would say worse overall just because of what you're supposed to represent and what you don't. It's in that debate, they were debating foreign policy. Leaders of countries are allowed to be tough and strong in the sense of foreign policy. Like, it's looking weak in this case is not allowed. Meaning Obama could be tougher and he could go after Mitt Romney in that debate because they're talking about foreign policy. I want to seem like a tough guy. I want to seem like a strong man. My name is Obama. I'm going to protect you, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, I can hit Romney in the face over and over and over again, and the public looks at us and says, "Bro, shit, he's being a strong man. He's trying to protect us." But that's like the roughest I think I've seen. The debate between Sanders and Clinton, was rough too. That was rough too. But again, that's a socialist actually having a debate with somebody who's like a Tory. So, yeah, he's going to go after her. And he's going to go after her from the standpoint of from the left. It's like, it's difficult to defend that. When you're having a debate in the primary in the Democratic Party, you're supposed to represent something that's on the left. And this guy's actually representing the left. And he's pitting you over and over and over and over again. And you have no defense for the things that the guy is saying. Yeah, some of those debates can be rough. But I love the debating style in this way. Allowing the person back to back to back to back to have a go at him on whatever they want to have this question or conversation on. And, you know, not bitching at the way they do the debate. Let them have their debate. There's a parliamentary system where, you know, there's control. They're not losing their shit. They're not cursing at one another, stuff like that. But if you want to be a little boisterous, if you want to rib your opponent, if you want to be somewhat scathing, have at it. I love it. I love it. Love it. Love it. Yeah, it's awesome. Hey, Jamal, where can I get one of those cool shirts? My wife made this. It's funny. I was thinking about, the other day I was setting up an account to do t-shirts because there's several shirts that I want to make. Bitter Enders is one. Fucking Amazing is another one. There's a few. And there's a t-shirt place in Richmond that was making them. So if I get those, I will put that link somewhere at the point where I start making them. But thank you, jerk. I appreciate it. Ridiculous Bernie Bro. Jamal, where can I get one of those cool shirts? Oh, somebody else said that. Just got the end of that one. Trump and Hillary was the roughest debate. He straight up said he threw her. right. He threw her in prison. Trump also mocked her health and husband infidelity. Yeah, Garden. Not just mocked it. He bought the people who were accusing her husband of rape and had a press conference with the people accusing her husband of rape. Yeah, you're right. That was rough. That was rough. Yeah, I agree. That was rough. Agreed. You're right. Agreed. I was looking at that the other day where he had the press conference and all of the women that was there saying Bill Clinton had raped or abused them. And Donald Trump was just allowing them to have their say. And he was like, wow. And now, Donald Trump did this because there was a video out with him saying, grab him by the pussy. And Donald Trump was trying to make the point that, look, I might have said grab him by the pussy, but Bill Clinton was actually grabbing him by the pussy. And between those two things, me saying it and him doing it, which one is worse? I think that's his point. That's the point that he was trying to make. But yeah, that was kind of vicious. That was pretty damn vicious. It's fucking hilarious. He's not throwing you in jail. And you know what? He might. He might end up throwing her in jail. The wild part is, and look, he should throw her in jail. He should. I'm sick of this fucking corruption. And if they catch Donald Trump doing corruption, he should be thrown in jail too. All of them. All of them. If the Mueller investigation finds some kind of link between Trump and Russia from a financial standpoint, that he's profiting off of being in that office, lock his ass up. I have no allegiances and no friends in this case. Hillary Clinton, if the FBI is looking into the Clinton Foundation, is going to be perp-walked. He's going to be perp-walked. If Jeff Sessions is doing his job, if Jeff Sessions has the capacity to read at all, Hillary Clinton will be perp-walked. To the brig. To the brig. I did think it was funny that Flynn is out, giving those speeches, lock her up, like he's flipping out. And then Flynn gets locked up. Lock him up. Lock him up. Yeah, that's fucking funny. I don't think she would be going to prison. She's a former SOS. All else aside, that in and of itself is enough to protect her. Yeah, you might be right. I mean, they're saying they don't know if they can make a case. They would make a case for anybody else. They would make a case with anybody else. That other guy who they retroactively classified something in order to put that guy in prison. If they wanted to, the FBI can indict a ham sandwich. So the idea that they can find charges to lock Hillary Clinton up on is fucking insanity. The Clinton Foundation in and of itself was pay to play politics. I think it was a slush fund. I don't know how you can look at WikiLeaks and not come to the conclusion. I showed this thing the other day where one of the guys was having a conversation about Chelsea Clinton saying, you guys need to tell Chelsea Clinton to shut the fuck up. Chelsea Clinton is going to mess this up. And Chelsea Clinton needs to know that some of the money from the foundation was going to her wedding. And if she doesn't want that to be known, she needs to shut up. You need to get Chelsea Clinton in line. It's amazing. That email by itself is an exchange of them saying Chelsea Clinton is saying things that's going to mess us up. And Chelsea Clinton needs to be quiet. And we have dirt on Chelsea Clinton. I was like, how can you look at that and not come away with even the inkling of, if Chelsea Clinton was doing an investigation and they're trying to shut Chelsea Clinton up, why are they trying to shut Chelsea Clinton up from her doing an investigation? And also, why are they saying they have dirt on Chelsea Clinton to get her in line? It's like, come on. Blah, blah. They only go low-level dudes to sate the public. Shadow puppet theater. Chelsea is somewhat of an airhead from what I've seen. That's why she isn't in front of a camera that often. I don't know what's going on with Chelsea, but to Chelsea's credit, it didn't seem like she was in on it. Like, it seemed like Chelsea was in this case of, like, what the hell is going on? Where is this money going? And why is this doing, why is this foundation set up in this way? It seemed like she was more shocked by the whole thing. Which makes me think that she probably didn't have anything to do with it. That being said, she profited from it, whether or not she knew she was profiting from it. I don't think it would happen, but I would like to think in a parallel universe it could actually have already happened, or none of them got in power in the first place. Dreams was in a parallel universe. Yeah. In a parallel universe, I would hope a lot of shit happened. I feel you, man. I totally feel you. Gordon Libby. I remember Gordon Libby. I would settle for deportation of the Clintons to any country that would allow them in, but the Clinton money stays here is fine. Hillary parked $200 million in Qatar. They can live on that. Look, personally, I think we have far too many people in prisons. I think we're far too easy to put people in prisons. I think many of the things that take place in our society with regards to crime and corruption and everything else is based on the way our society is arranged. It's like it's people functioning to the program. Regardless of the things that we talk about, integrity and values and everything else, the truth is our economic system doesn't allow integrity and values. How can you allow integrity and values when you need to feed your wife or feed yourself or make sure you have a roof over your head? I mean, ultimately, anything that you want to do is going to be subordinate to making sure you have your needs met. Meaning there's always going to be a downward pressure on this idea of values and integrity and everything else, unless you're doing something that would allow you to have those things. I'm making this point that our society is arranged in a particular way. The arrangement is what drives this particular behavior. Putting people in prison or throwing them away assumes that the people are purely just individual things. This particular thing is separate and distinct from everything else, as if it's functioning in a void, so we can just throw that thing away because that thing made bad decisions. As opposed to, well, that particular person wasn't just an individual and distinct thing. That particular person is in a society, in a culture, in a country, on a planet, in a world that has certain value systems, that has certain drivers, that has certain propaganda that's ensconced, that has certain ideologies. Challenging those things and not necessarily just throwing that person away is probably a better way to do that. But in either case, having as many people in our prisons in this way it's gross. We're putting people in cages, human beings in cages. Most of those people are in cages for smoking plants or doing some kind of drug, making personal choices. Immensely problematic. That being said, meaning I take this position that I hate this idea of putting people in prison in the way that we're putting people in prison, particularly for nonviolent crimes. That being said, you have a government ensconced in corruption. And I know of no other mechanism of cleaning that corruption out, at least in the beginning, until you can get to the point of changing the way your government is organized to weed out corruption in the way that it operates. Then to put some of those people in prison, you need to put the hammer down. You need to go in and you need to say who's being corrupt and what is causing this particular corruption. But first, who's being corrupt? Who are the guardians of this particular system? Who are the people who have profited magnificently off the expense of the rest of the American public? And yeah, at the point where you're finding somebody monetizing the State Department, I think that's immensely problematic. I think it's extraordinarily problematic. This has nothing to do with party. This has nothing to do with Hillary Clinton personally in and of herself. This has everything to do with cleaning corruption from government. You and I can have arguments over policy and politics. You may say I'm far to the left. I may say you're far to the right. We may bump heads on that stuff. But usually, we can meet somewhere in the middle if we're just functioning on a level of integrity and we're trying to come to some kind of deal and arrangement. And I suspect I will win that argument because I think the American public is closer to me. But whatever. That's a different argument, though, than if I'm paid to stand in the square and you're paid to stand in your square. And because I'm paid to stand in this particular square, and if I get out that particular square, I'm not going to get paid anymore and I'm going to have money that's aligned against me. Well, now I have an incentive to not bridge the gap. And not to mention, I have an incentive to not even pay attention to the American public itself, because the American public is not the person who's paying me to stay in that square. There's no such thing as politics when you're talking about corruption. Or at the very least, the politics is purely beyond the oligarchs. I'm saying you need to clean house. And I'm saying you need to break that apparatus that would allow those people to be bribed in the first place. Both of those things need to take place. Otherwise, there's no such thing as politics in America. Bernie promised last time to keep personalities out of his campaign. Who knows what comes in 2020? Bob Ramirez, based on the way our society is deranged. Yeah, deranged is probably a better word. Yeah, I agree, Bob. Deranged is a better way of calling that. Agreed. Agreed. Mark M., there's an economic rationale about prison privatization. Putting poor people in prison is the only way corporations can profit off of them. That means your society is fucked up and it's off. Yeah, that means your society is off. Approximately $50,000 spent on Russian bots before the election in blue states. $200,000 in total. That's nothing. Mike. She had $1 billion. I mean, come on. She had $1 billion fucking dollars in that race. You're telling me that $100,000? Fuck it. $500,000 in Russian dollars. And that's not the case, but in Russian ads on Facebook. She is the most incompetent person in the world if you're telling me that $200,000 in Facebook ads or Twitter ads toppled her $1 billion candidacy. Come on. That's too ridiculous to entertain. I'm from the UK and record PMQ every week. I love it. Rock M. Yeah, agreed. Agreed. I love it, man. Political Shakespeare. Nina would make it for Warren. Warren wouldn't make it otherwise. I would vote for Turner. I like Turner. I am dubious about Warren. Fair weather friend Warren. Gabbard. Yes. Should we get my vote? Sanders. Easily get my vote. Turner. Definitely get my vote. How are you highlighting a name? Sure is blah blah. Throw in Dalek Party. Bad Mama Jama. Oh, thank you, Bad Mama Jama. Guys like you and Jimmy Dore are keeping the torch of truth lit, while powerful forces try like hell to extinguish it. Keep doing your thing. Much respect. Bad Mama Jama. Thanks. I appreciate it, man. And guys, I appreciate the super cash. I appreciate my patrons also. You guys are more of a help than I think you realize. So, thank you very much. And let me read that again because I kind of screwed that up. Guys like you and Jimmy Dore are keeping the torch of truth lit, while powerful forces try to like hell to extinguish it. Keep doing what you're doing. Much respect. I appreciate it, man. I try. I enjoy it. I mean, the libertarians like to make this argument, and then right-wingers in general make this argument, that people only do things because they're paid to do things, as if that's the only incentive structure that's ever created. Again, somewhat of a religious belief. I wasn't paid to do this. I would imagine, I don't think St. Progressive was paid to do this. I think a lot of these people who started their channels wasn't paid to do this. You have people who go out every day and do things because they just love to do those things. At a certain point, you start getting paid to do it because you want to support yourself doing the thing that you love to do. My goal in this, at least now, is to reach a certain number of subscribers where I can do this full time, where I can grow and expand my channel. And maybe expand into live events and stuff like that. But the inception of it was just, I am annoyed and I am pissed off, and I want to get that across, and I want to give my point of view on how I see what takes place. That was it. That was the incentive. That was a push. And somewhere along the line, I was like, holy shit, I'm not too bad at this. I like this. I feel natural doing this. People do things all the time just because they're driven to do those things. The vulgar compulsion of trying to get somebody to work by taking their needs away from them. You're not going to be able to eat or sleep or have somewhere to live. You're going to die on the street hungry and thirsty unless you pick a plantation in which to give your labor to and make somebody else massive amounts of cash. Your society does not have to be arranged in that way. It doesn't have to be arranged in that way at all. Think of the people who do animal rescue. Think of the people who donate their time. Not because, again, they have to. They do it just because they love doing that particular thing. All sorts of things people love to do. Your society can be set up with different incentives than this vulgar compulsion of cash. And even if you did have a society that's built around some level of exchange of cash or some level of exchange of some kind of credit or product, you could at least make a floor in the society that people aren't forced to work for somebody that they don't necessarily want to work for. Meaning, people aren't forced to be fry cooks. Your society has a basic floor that each and every person in the society has at least a basic floor. There's no such thing as people being in poverty or hungry or anything else. Meaning, there's nobody who's going to be a fry cook if they have to choose. So you find some other way to do that particular thing, or that particular job doesn't exist. And by the way, that has other consequences. I mean, when you're looking at cancers and heart disease and all this other stuff and the illness that plagues human beings, that's because of our diet. That's because of the air that we breathe. That's because of the way that we live our lives. Sperm count dropping in Western nations by 40%. That is because of the way we live our lives. Meaning, you create a capitalistic system that says it's okay to imprison animals, that it's okay to have wildlife and animal habitation in the way that it is, where you're effectively torturing animals. That's okay. I can serve these animals as hamburgers and everything else. That's okay too. People can buy these and we can have stores. This is fucked up in two ways. you subordinated human beings into being fry cooks, meaning all of the value and potential that's in that particular human being. If that particular human being had the capacity to do whatever that human being wanted, meaning to go to school, take some trade, whatever. If that person had his needs met, that person probably would never be a fry cook. But in this case, that person has to make his ends, so he's a fry cook. All of this potential of a human being squandered and squashed into dropping french fries. The french fries that person drops, the hamburgers that person flip, is going to go to somebody else who's going to eat that hamburger, and in 20 years is going to end up with some kind of cancer or heart disease or diabetes or liver disease or whatever else. It's low quality food. The point of the food is not food. The point of the food in this case is profit. It's means to an end. All of the enterprises, all of the things that happen in our society is a means to an end. That end being profit. Meaning, yes, they're going to cut corners on those things, because if they do the things the way those things should be done, they're going to lose out. You can make an argument that Theresa May's argument on the NHS kind of falls in line with that. Yes, she's going to cut corners on it because she doesn't necessarily see it as this main thing. To her, these other things are more important. It's this system itself. We're going to allow private enterprise into the system because we believe that markets, there's this market-driven solution to things. Our system doesn't have to be this way. That's my point. It doesn't have to be this way. Americans need to bring back respect, integrity, and politics back to the United States. No more celebrities. How do you do that? Explain to me. How do you do that? And the way the system is set up, how do you do that? Explain it. You have a car salesman. That car salesman has a wife and a kid. That wife and kid needs to eat. They need to have somewhere to stay. And that car salesman sells your car. Now, his integrity would say, look, the other place around the street has a car just like this. That's $1,000 less. His integrity would tell him to say, look, there's some issues that we found with this particular car that you need to know about in advance. But if his wife needs to eat, if he needs to pay rent, if he needs to make sure that his kid is fed, what's his incentive? Is his incentive to tell you about the issue with the car? Is his incentive to tell you that there's a car somewhere around the street for $1,000 less that's pretty much the same? Or is his incentive to sell you the car? It's to sell you the car. It's not that he's a bad guy. It's not that he's a horrible guy. It's his integrity. Doesn't count in this scenario. He needs to make ends meet. If he doesn't make ends meet, his wife is not going to eat. He's not going to eat. They're not going to be able to pay their rent, etc., etc., etc. You have these situations magnified all throughout your particular society. The weaker the safety net, the worse that scenario gets. Meaning, without a safety net, that person will run into difficulties where he wouldn't be able to supply the things that he needs. So yes, he's going to sell that car. He's going to sell that car. Oprah supported the invasion of Iraq. Anyone gullible and uninformed enough to believe that shrill should not run for office, they probably shouldn't even vote. No, they got to have the capacity to vote. It's their right to vote. Like Jamal was saying, Tory attacks on Corbin over Blairite corruption and bad policy don't fly. He can't be tarnished from that point of view. Yeah, how can you tarnish the guy when you fundamentally look at the guy as being something different? You can't have it both ways. You cannot have it both ways. Alright guys, I'm going to end this. I may have one more that I want to do, but thank you guys for showing up, and you guys have a good night. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Super Cash or Patreon. Thanks everyone. And Bam Mama Jamma, again, thank you for your support. Let's appreciate it.